The Flushing girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very, very, very special bonus episode of Oh, Mr. Sheffield, the podcast where we talk about the 90s hit sitcom, The Nanny, starring Fran Drescher. I am Shawn Pasquale, here with...
Toria Sheffield.
That's right. No relation to the titular Mr. Sheffield. And this week, folks, strap on your hats. Do people strap on hats? I don't know. Hold on to your butts because we've got a doozy for you. Toria, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to try not to screw this up because I messaged Shawn very, very early this morning. I'm very nervous and excited. He's a much calmer person than I am, but okay, I'm going to try to get through it. So if you listen to our podcast, then you will know that this is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Today, we are talking to Peter Marc Jacobson, co-creator of The Nanny. He executive produced the series. He wrote countless episodes. He was a huge creative force behind the show. He's also a writer, director, producer, and actor in his own right. We've talked a little about this before, but he went on to do What I Like About You and Happily Divorced, which he, of course, did with Fran Drescher, a number of other major projects. But so let's give a warm, oh, Mr. Sheffield, welcome to Peter Marc Jacobson.
Yay!
Hey, guys.
Yes.
Hey, Shawn. Hey, Toria.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is very exciting. We when we first started the podcast, we kept going like, okay, well, once we get through the whole series, then we will throw ourselves at Fran and Peter's feet and be like, we did all of them. Please come talk to us.
You only had to go to season 2 for me.
I know. Yeah. That's so exciting.
And I think this was also such a lesson in don't be afraid to ask for things, because basically to our listeners, Peter really, really kindly and nicely reached out to say some nice things about the podcast on social media. And I was literally texting Shawn. I didn't even get to send the text. Oh my gosh, do you think I can ask him? Do you think I should ask him if he maybe wants to come on? Because I didn't want you to be put in a position to have to say no and feel bad. And then you kind of very kindly kind of put it out there and said, if you ever would, I would be happy to. And I just thought, oh my gosh, wow, I could have asked that and I would have gone through this whole mental slog of projection.
You put it out into the universe and the universe answered you, and always ask, what's the worst they can say? No?
Yeah. Well, and also, Toria, we're both Jewish people, so worrying unnecessarily about things is in our blood. So.
Yes, I believe me, I get it.
Yeah. But so this, again, we could not have been happier, and it felt, yes, we put something out there and it was answered.
My pleasure, and thank you guys for promoting the show and enjoying it so much. It's so great to always meet fans and people that enjoy it, and it made all the work worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I one of the things that speaks to me most about this show is its embracement of Fran's Jewishness. Especially when it first aired, there weren't a ton of TV shows that just openly celebrated being Jewish. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I know, when I first got into it as a kid, it was because my mother was like, you have to watch this show. It's like living in our house, and it's like being with grandma when her mother comes over. And
yet, when it started, it was the most popular in the Midwest.
That's crazy.
Because beyond the Jewishness of it, it's a very universal story. It's everyone has knows a mother like Sylvia, and everyone has a grandmother like Yetta, and so a lot of people from Southern and from Africa, from all over the world, said they related to this relationship because it's just human. It's not really. Yeah. This girl happens to be Jewish, but that's just, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's, the larger sort of wish fulfillment, fish out of water elements to it are also universal. Who doesn't want to go get scooped up, out of their neighborhood and go live in a mansion? Yeah.
Exactly. It's a fairy tale.
So, Peter, where were you in life before The Nanny got greenlit? Can you talk to us a little bit about like where were you like career wise and how it all sort of came into creation?
You know, when we were 15, we met in high school, Fran and I, and we were watching and thinking of ideas for sitcoms. Then we were very driven to wanting to do a sitcom together. At the time, acting together, but we would write ideas. And our manager, when we moved to Los Angeles at 21, Elaine Rich, always loved the ideas we came up with. And she said, you really should do this, Peter, instead of acting. This is really, and Fran used to say it too. I was much more comfortable behind the scenes than actually acting. I worked as an actor. I did a lot of episodics, pilots, movies, lots of stuff. Sure. Most of which you will not remember. But I was never really comfortable. I always felt uncomfortable. Most comfortable on stage. That's where I felt the most comfortable. But in front of a camera, it was a lot of pressure for me. So, you know, I thought I would get fired when I got the job. Then I thought I'd get cut once I did the job. And, you know, so Fran, I used to drive her crazy. And she said, you've got to get out of this business or I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
I just drove her nuts. And I decided, because I was getting really depressed over something and some part that I didn't get or something. So I decided, okay, that's it. I'm done. And we were friends with Dan Aykroyd and Donna Dixon. And I said to him at dinner, I have this idea for you for a show. And it's called, it's like Cops, except it's a spoof on it. Sort of like Reno 911, only 10 years before Reno 911.
Sure.
And he said, I love that idea. And he took it to 20th Century Fox and he sold it that day.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, and I want you to be the executive producer. Now, that doesn't happen ever.
Yeah.
And he said, you came up with the idea for it. We'll work on it. We'll write it together. We brought on another writer. And we made the pilot. What
was the show called?
It was called CCPD.
Okay.
Chula, what was it? Costa Chula Police Department. And it basically was a spoof on, you know, on cops, except crimes were things like, you know, we had two gay men arguing where they were going to put the chaise in their apartment. And they would call, you know, and were disturbing the peace. We had a woman being held up at her kid's birthday party in the little dog house. And, you know, I mean, it was very, you know, and played very real. And, you know, it was very funny and it got picked up actually.
Wow.
But there was some contractual problem. I remember at the same time we sold The Nanny at the same season. And that's the show I wanted to do, but I was contractually held to CCPD first. But because of this problem they were having, they decided they weren't going to go forward with it. And so I did The Nanny. So it was, you know, it was just, you know, two shows in one season. And I was already given the executive producer credit. So I became an executive producer on The Nanny, which, you know, for CBS, which doesn't happen either. And that's sort of how it all happened. So,
and then, you know, prior to that, at least based on IMDb, which I know isn't always correct, you're credited for a story on an episode of Who's the Boss. So had you already been like working in writers' rooms prior to selling these shows, or was that like your first gig as a writer?
No, I never worked in a writer's room. My manager called the woman who was producing a spinoff, wanted to produce a spinoff on Who's the Boss for Fran and Donna Dixon, and who was in Bosom Buddies, just did Bosom Buddies. And I guess at the time she wasn't sure about what to do for them or wanted some input. It was Eve Branstein, who's a brilliant casting director and producer. I mean, the best in the business in casting, definitely. Did all the old Norman Lear shows, and she liked me, and I liked her. And she said, "Well, let me meet Peter, and maybe we can come up with some stuff." And we came up with a story that was a spinoff, and that was all I had to do with that show. But I got storyboard credit, and
so that was a backdoor pilot for this other show.
Yes.
Oh, that's so. Oh man, now I want to go back and rewatch that. That's so interesting. I love backdoor pilots. It's one of my favorite TV things.
Yeah, it was. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no! I was just continue. I was just going to say. So then you. It sort of sounds like the way you're describing it. You got an executive producer credit on the Nanny because of this sort of technicality of this other show, but you kind of overnight basically became the captain of a ship. So that sort of leads really well into our next question, which is what was that like if you hadn't, hadn't worked as an EP for very long on anything else, and now like all eyes looking to you.
It sounds like you hadn't even had the benefit of working in a writer's room prior to this. So yeah, what was that like for you?
Well, smartly, they said to us, CBS said that we're going to pair you up with another team because obviously you don't know how to do this yet.
Sure. And
they will guide you and develop it with you. And that was Rob Sternan and Prudence Fraser, who worked on Who's the Boss. Mm-hmm. They taught us, and they were very kind, and we're friends to this day, and said, this is your show. We don't want to take over your show. We want to teach you. And then we want to also, have our lives and have kids while working on the show. And, but this is your shot.
Wow.
And they were very, and it's funny because the first person we met was Diane English, who at the time was doing Murphy Brown, the biggest hit on CBS. Mm-hmm. We said, wow, if she wants to do it, with us. But she turned it down, and lucky was meant to be because we got these fantastic showrunners who worked with us, and it was really a gift.
Well, that's like the dream, right? Is two veterans coming in to be like, we are not trying to take over, but we are going to give you all the tools you need to do this. That's incredible. That must have felt very validating too, after, having felt like, all right, I'm done acting and I don't know what I'm going to do now. And then like, oh, okay, well, I guess this is what I'm meant to do.
I literally was doing a modeling gig, I think. And then I did my last show, which was a Matlock. And I remember Fran calling me saying, the head of CBS wants us to take a meeting. I said, well, I just have to finish this modeling gig. She said, are you crazy? I said, well, I'm doing it. I got to finish it. And so that was it. After that, I said, I won't do any more, of that stuff. I'll concentrate completely on the Nanny. And,
wow.
And the story of her, meeting the president of CBS, Jeff Sagansky, who was our hero.
Yeah, on an airplane, right?
Was true. It's true.
Wow. Well, it's just one of those things where I feel like anybody listening, especially as we do have younger listeners, a good amount of them. Yeah. I think when you imagine life, you imagine it in this straight line where, everything linearly follows the next. And really what it is a lot of seemingly random stuff and sometimes disappointing stuff happening. And then that ends up leading you sideways to something you didn't expect and this and that. And then it was like the luckiest things that ever could have happened. And you can kind of like retroactively look back and see the line, but it doesn't feel that way in the moment. Like you were saying, you had this other, the comedy cop show was really what you wanted. And then there was disappointment there. And then, wanting these other creative partners, and they said no. And I'm sure there were some feelings of like, oh no, we really wanted them, but that doesn't feel good. And then like the best possible scenario ends up happening out of that. So it's just, I don't know. I always try to keep that in mind, like even for Shawn and myself. I think.
When doors open, walk through them. Yeah. Don't second guess too much because, I could have stupidly have said, I want to continue my acting career, but this giant thing opened up and I knew that this was, a a once in a lifetime chance.
Yeah.
And just, I jumped in with.
Well, so before we dive into the stuff that I know everyone really wants to hear, which is the nanny questions. If you could go back and give yourself advice on day one of like, okay, you're walking into the writer's room, you're now the executive producer of this new TV show. What would you have said that you learned after the fact that you wish you had known on that first day?
Boy, I think to have trusted myself more, although I did trust myself, I got to honestly say it was one of those things that, I get very nervous about run-throughs and making sure everything was done on time, So I can't really say I did anything that I wish I would have done differently, except maybe have been a little calmer. I've learned how to produce and direct and write without so much chaos. But because of fear, half not knowing what I was doing, and yet half. I would not settle for what I called room jokes, when someone would pitch a joke and it was funny, but then I would say, okay, but how do we make this very, very specific to these people? And that takes a long time, sometimes hours for doing one joke. But I must say, and I'm very proud of the work the writers did with us, and because the jokes still play 30 years later.
They really do.
So I feel like, okay, I was a pain in the butt, but I was worth it, because I watch the shows now and it's like, wow, that's still funny.
That's interesting, because we've pointed out to each other in our rewatch several times that the jokes that land the best are the jokes that feel like only could come out of a particular character's mouth. And that's when I think the show is at its best. Like our favorite episodes, that we've rewatched so far are the shows that, what's the one, Toria, where they're locked in the wine cellar. The wine cellar. Right, the wine cellar. And that episode plays so well because it's just Fran and Cece getting to be Fran and Cece. And it's great. Everything that comes out of their mouths is like true to them and hilarious. And
I believe with sitcoms, excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, please.
Specificity is the most important thing. A lot of sitcoms are very generic. And television are very generic. The ones that are the most specific are the ones like Roseanne that soar, I feel, because they're so specific. Only those people, those people, you've met those people. So when they say Archie Bunker, the lines that would come out of those characters, you felt like you knew them. They were like real people. And the same with the nanny. It's like, Sylvia, the lines that would come out of her mouth were the lines that would come out of Fran's mother's mouth.
Yeah.
And so, we knew how to write those people. And I think the best sitcoms, at least for me, are the ones that are super specific.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's very true. All right. So Toria, let's talk about the nanny now.
Okay. Well, we were talking about the nanny,
but now let's get into the nitty gritty,
the geeky stuff. This one's not even a real question, but it's something we want clarification. Pronouncing Lee Shamel. Is that correct?
Lee Shallot.
Shamel. Shallot. Okay. Good.
Okay, we've been saying that wrong.
We've got to go back and re-record every episode now.
Great director, by the way. That's great.
She's phenomenal. We specifically ask about her because every episode that we love is always her episodes. And she seems to have the tightest grip on physical comedy episodes. It seems like she's your pinch hitter every time you have like a very physical comedy episode. She really directs the hell out of them.
She did the first season of Happily Divorced too. She did, I think she did the first season of Princesses too. Well, it was only one season of Princesses. She, Fran and I use a lot of people that we've worked with and that we say, oh, this person is really gifted. Let's remember them. Fran went to a show and saw Ann Hampton Callaway years before. And she said, when I have my own show, you're going to write the theme song. And she,
wow.
Yeah. And her accountant calls it her best work as of yet.
I mean, honestly, that was one of the very first thing we talked about in the very first episode of this podcast was the theme song. And we even said like, we could talk about that theme song for the whole hour that we talked. Because we love it.
Yeah, because aside from being catchy, it really does all of the work a theme song should do. And it's sad that we sort of lost theme songs along the way as TV's evolved. It's very sad because there's something truly magical about just setting the scene for every episode with like a perfectly worded theme song that gives you all of the information you need.
When you were a kid, you used to get excited. You'd hear like Bewitched. Well, you probably were too young, but or whatever the one was, and it would like get you excited. The show's on to get settled down and watch it.
Sure, Growing Pains, Family Ties.
They all had great theme songs.
Yeah,
this one tells the story so that if you tune in in season 7, you still know 6. I mean, you still know what the show's about.
Yeah.
Okay, so now for the less questions that were just for us, which was Alicia
that was just for us.
So I want to know, were there any episode ideas that you really wanted to do but just couldn't get the network to get on board?
No, we really wanted to get Streisand on the show.
Yes.
But she didn't do it. And years later, she said, thanks for keeping my career alive. Because we talked about it all the time. And, she said, I didn't have to do anything. And you guys just kept me, relevant. And interesting quick story. When we started doing the Nanny, we had no money at all. We were in debt, quite a bit of money. And it's when Streisand had her first big comeback tour. And we bought tickets at Madison Square Garden, which we could only afford like the last row of Madison Square Garden at the time, because you had to buy them so far in advance. In between then and then, the Nanny happened. But we had these tickets, so, we're from Queens. We're not going to throw them away. So we go to Madison Square Garden, the two of us, and we sit up in the boondocks. And on the big Tron, they put Fran's face on there. And they all start screaming, Fran, Fran, Fran.
Oh, my God.
And we're like looking around and 2 security guards come and tap us on the shoulder and said, follow us. And we said, we didn't do anything. And they said, just come with us. And they take us all the way downstairs to the second row. And they put 2 chairs there and they said, sit here. And I was so naive. I said, yeah, but what if the people who got these seats come during the concert? We don't want to miss any of it. And he said, don't worry about it.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
He said, after the show, Miss Streisand would like to meet you. And
oh, my God.
We're like, well, now we don't want the show. We want the show to be over so we can go back there and meet her. So we go back there when we meet her, and she knew Renee Taylor. They used to work together back in the day. And she was so sweet and so nice. And she sent us home in a limo.
Oh, my God.
And we looked at each other in the limo after coming from the subway. And we said, things have changed. Things are never going to be the same after this. Things have definitely changed.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. It was an amazing night.
Wow. That's a dream. That's amazing. My mother would die to have met Barbra Streisand. So
yeah, it was pretty amazing. Okay.
Yeah, it's incredible. So it sounds like for the cameos on the show, were you writing episodes around who you wanted, or were you securing people and then crafting the episode around who you got, or was it a bit of both?
It was my idea in the beginning to make him a Broadway producer, so that gave us an opportunity to bring in a lot of stars. And at the time, Broadway, was not as, it allowed us to bring people in that I loved and Fran loved. We had Carol Channing on for like 2 lines, and
sure, Ben Vereen,
and a lot of big Broadway people. So we kind of, it was a love letter to Broadway because we loved it so much.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people maybe didn't know who these people were, but in those days, kind of like Broadway and television, people did know. I mean, everyone knew who Carol Channing was. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But, it was kind of like a dream to get these people on the sound stage and to work with them, and the likes of Elizabeth Taylor and Elton John. But Fran would go and hit those phones and call people because everyone loved the show at the time and wanted to be on it, and so she made sure they were.
Wow. It's the musical theater element is the other element of this that spoke directly to me as a kid anyway, because I was a musical theater. I went to this like performing arts high school, where I got bussed in, and so I was like a musical theater nerd at the time, and so this show was speaking to me on so many levels, and I was always curious if that was, you or Fran or the both of you just sort of deciding like, hey, let's meet our heroes and get them on TV.
Well, we did musicals in high school together, and our teacher, we actually ended up hiring to be the dialogue coach for the kids.
Oh my gosh!
And we always. I guess I was more of a musical guy than Fran was, but she always loved them. But she wasn't really. She didn't really love. She wasn't really a singer, but she was always really funny. And and in musicals, a lot of times you don't have to sing; you can just talk a song.
Yeah.
I mean, Carol Channing wasn't a great singer. She, but she was damn funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, and then, sticking with musical theater for a moment, the Andrew Lloyd Webber of it all, was this, did you sort of make him, Maxwell's foil because you were a huge fan or because you were a Sondheim guy?
I know. I love them both. Sondheim's amazing, and
Sondheim's amazing.
As is Andrew Lloyd Webber. I mean, I don't really remember how that came to be. It was a joke in the pilot, I think, and it just sort of played well. And when a joke plays well, you remember, and then you sort of start a run of them, and it becomes a thing for the character. In the musical that we're doing now, it's a running thing too. Now we can really delve into the musical theater. Sure.
Oh yeah.
Well, and
oh my gosh, yeah.
I definitely want to hear more about the musical and how that's going. So what can you say about the development process for that?
I never believe how long it takes. I mean, Hamilton took 6 years, and this will probably take 8. But it's just, a television show has never really been on Broadway as a musical.
Sure.
And so it's finding how to make that work in the world of musicals, because a character like Fran didn't really change in the TV show.
Right.
But she in a musical, the hero needs to take a journey. And, so we had to figure that out, which took a long time. But we feel like we cracked it, and we think it's a really good story. And Rachel Bloom is doing the music, who is
incredible,
so incredibly funny.
Yeah.
And and they just hired a casting director, the Telsey Group, which does a lot of big Broadway shows, and so we're starting the search. And
you got to find another Fran.
Yeah, that's hard. And we don't want somebody doing an imitation of her. We want a unique girl on her own, because if you do an imitation, it becomes too camp. And then
agreed.
It's she's got to, we need a little Streisand. So that's what we're kind of looking for.
I know there was something where I think Fran had said she would advocate for like Cardi B as a new nanny in the Nanny reboot. Are there any people that kind of catch your eye, or when you're just watching, something on your own, think like, yes, like they would be perfect for that energy or that role?
You mean for the musical, for the reboot?
Oh, for the reboot. I kind of jumped around, but I was thinking for the reboot.
Well, Cardi B is really funny.
Yes.
She's beautiful, and she's got great style. If you put her with a very, very straight-laced man, that would be a very funny show.
Yes.
Specific onto her, it would have to be written for her. She'd have to want to do a television show. It's very hard work. The hours are endless, and you've got to have great discipline to do it. But she certainly could be written for, and I know would be very, very funny. That, a woman like Pink could do something like it. Also very unique, and she could do it. There are those women out there that are very specific talents that are very offbeat, and those are the ones that usually become the giant stars because there's no one else like them. They're able to, they're just in their own galaxy. There's, they're hard to find, man, and there aren't a lot. But the ones that Bette Midler and Cher and those ladies that are one of a kinds.
Sure.
That everybody has their own thing, and so if you're an actor out there or an actress, don't try to stifle that. Be you fully, because there's only one you, and that's what's going to make you special. A lot of people told Fran, get rid of that voice. You've got to take lessons. And I said, don't. That's what's going to make you a star. Mm-hmm. And and I truly believed it. I said, when you look like that and have a voice like that, it's so unique. They just don't know what to do with it. They just can't fit you in the box. But when they can fit you in the box, that's a good sign.
Yeah. Or as seemingly happened with the Nanny, she made her own box. She said, "This is what I do," and people loved it. And
absolutely,
that's definitely the way to go. So it sounds like the musical. It sounds like you're trying to bring the TV show to the stage. And stay as true to what the show was as possible. But, when you talk about like someone like Cardi B for like a reboot show, that casting changes things, right? It certainly changes the conversation and it can add a lot. So do you guys, is that where your creative interests are taking you? Is that like, hey, if we're going to redo this, let's not just redo the same exact thing, but let's try to have a new conversation in the same packaging?
I'm not interested in doing another Nanny with another girl that would be like Fran. That thing, I feel like that's been done. We've had a couple of ideas for redoing the show with Fran, continuing it, and have come up with some great ideas for that, which I cannot share.
Sure.
But, that we could do, what these characters are up to 10 years later, 20, 30 years later. That's one version. And then the other version is, we cast a Cardi B, and we cast, I'm trying to think of who could play Mr. Sheffield. But it would be, Cardi B and her family. And she wouldn't have to be Jewish. She could be, whatever. It doesn't matter because she's a fish out of water. Mm-hmm. Cardi B's a fish out of water wherever you put her. So, and a great fish because, she is funny. And if she's written for properly, would be brilliant. And I mean, she's funny on her own. I love her. I think she's,
it would almost be interesting to see like someone like Cardi B with a Jewish family.
There was talk about that too. There was talk about where Fran might have been married a black man, and they had Cardi, and Fran was her mother. And
oh wow!
And, there was talk about that too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It must be fun for you guys to get to, all these years later, to get to replay in this world. Was this something that when the show finally ended, were you guys like, man, someday maybe we'll return to this? Or was it, the new sort of wave of reboots and remakes as it cropped up? Did you guys start to perk your ears up and go, oh, maybe we could do this?
Yeah. I think when it ended, it was, we were all going through a lot. I mean, we were getting divorced. The show I was moving to New York. It felt like it was over. We didn't want it to end. The network, actually, the season 5 said to us, you have to either get them married or we're going to cancel it. And if you get them married and it does well at the wedding, we'll give you another year. So we weren't given really a choice because once you, on a show like The Nanny, get them married, it's basically over.
Yep.
The sexual tension is gone. This wasn't our choice. It's, they look at it as for ratings. Every week it's just the ratings. That's it. And, they got what they wanted. There was huge ratings for the wedding, but it was like, okay, but now what do we do? So, people today, they get frustrated that they're not together, but once they get together, they stop touching.
That's the show. Yeah. Well, so how would you have ended things if they didn't end up together, or would you have just let, if you could have, would you have just run the show and the natural end point regardless would have eventually been to have them get married?
Yeah, I think we would have stretched it out as long as we possibly could. They moved us to Wednesday night, which was sort of like a graveyard. Yeah. When the Les Moonves came on. And we held it for a year or two, and then it began to, but there was never anything after us or to help. And eventually, we could have probably gone for another, if we stayed on Monday, we probably could have gone 8 years. But and then end at the wedding, which was a beautiful ending. And and that's how that was the dream of doing it. But we were employing hundreds and hundreds of people, and we didn't want it to end in season 5 because all those paychecks stop. Yeah. All these people that are working, and including ourselves, and we wanted it to keep going as long as possible because the more you have to sell to syndication, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so it made sense, of course, to go, hey, you know what? Let's get him married and see how it works out. But did you guys find once you had done that, ratings aside, did you find that creatively in the room that became a much harder show to write?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once you lose the sexual tension, the flirting, all that stuff, it's not as, they're married, they're living together, they become a couple, and that becomes more of that, the differences in their lives as a couple, and which just isn't as exciting as will they or won't they?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, Shawn, we've talked about this before, this exact dynamic. We say it's like the Jim and Pam of it all, like from the
Ross
Office.
And Rachel.
And the thing that, I even say I stopped watching The American Office when Jim and Pam got together, and then it just, became about their marital problems, which were depressing, and it wasn't, the 30 minutes of escapism that I wanted to tune into anyway.
Sure, and that you can start to see the wheels come off, because you can tell that once they do get married, then the writers are in the same situation Peter's describing. And so then it becomes like, well, now we need to throw kinks into their marriage in order to get them back to a place where we don't know if they're going to work out. But then that's like less fun to watch than people flirting, is to watch people of course, being upset. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's usually, and I don't think it's usually the writers who decide to do this stuff. Of course. People think it is, but it's usually the powers that be that say, well, ratings are going down, or we need a sweeps show and we need this. And we need them to, people are getting frustrated with the testing and they test the shows constantly too, which I think is a waste of time. But,
yeah, I agree.
They just, people forget, like Seinfeld was on the air for 2 or 3 years before anybody watched it, only because the heads of NBC loved the show, knew this was a very special show. But if it was on today, it would have been off in 4 episodes.
Yeah, well, and if they hadn't believed in it, it would have never made it past the first season. I think people that don't understand this business don't realize how much decisions can come down to like 3 executives in a room who just decide, not for us, regardless of whether or not people are enjoying it. But you also, you mentioned how, as this series was ending, you guys were also, going through a rough time and you were going through a divorce, which, it makes me wonder, prior to that, was it easier to be married to someone that you were working with so closely, or was it harder on the working relationship?
The work was never a problem. Really, honestly, that wasn't the problem. I think that I wasn't living my full, true life as who I am. I think that was my problem. And I would get very controlling. Since I wasn't controlling my own life, I figured, I'll control hers. And it drove her nuts after a while, especially when you're working together 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
12, 15, whatever it was, every day and under intense pressure. And it finally just, was too much. And that was, but we continued to work together.
Which is sort of a testament to what you're saying, that it didn't really affect the work. You guys clearly have, a very strong creative partnership, regardless of, whatever intimate relationship you were, having at the time.
We had a very good manager. We shared the same manager, and her name was Elaine Rich, as I said. And she said to us when we split, she said, now listen, you've both worked too hard to make this happen.
Yeah.
And it would be a waste of so much to now throw it away. Mm-hmm. This is your baby. This is what you've got to nurture. And she was right. And we did. We put all that other shit, excuse my language, aside.
That's fine.
And worked together, and at night went home separate ways. But it was very hard and very difficult. And, but, this was our chance, and we couldn't not see it through.
I mean, it's a very mature decision to make. And I think I love the story of you two. I think it's really inspirational. And I think that it's really beautiful to see two people, be able to focus on their work and understand that like what they have there is special, regardless of whether or not, their personal relationships working out. Because so many times you see creative partnerships dissolve over less than this, So yeah, it's really fascinating to me. And I think you guys are really impressive people for your whole careers. Yeah.
Well,
I think it's really amazing.
A great friendship. We're best friends. We love each other. We respect each other. We trust each other. We've known each other since we were 15 years old. So,
that's adorable.
It's just been, and you don't get people like that in your life that often. And so, it would have been a bad investment of time, as Elaine said, if you just don't find a way to make all of it.
Sure. Yeah, manager and marriage therapist. She sounds like an amazing woman.
Yes, she was, and she's passed on since then. But we still remember many things she told us throughout our careers that guided us through a lot of stuff, from 2 kids from Queens, and then being in Hollywood, and really, someone who cared about us and loved us and wanted us to succeed. And she was, very wise, and we should all have an Elaine Rich in our life.
Sure. Yeah. That's beautiful.
I mean, it's also just crazy to think about. Like, I think about this, when you think of like John and Paul meeting as kids in Liverpool, and you think, okay, it's already kind of lightning in a bottle that there is one person who is talented and creative and has the drive, and then they somehow happen to, be in a class with another person that is also perfectly suited to it, or somehow meets at a young age, and then everything else follows. But it's like, I mean, what are the odds,
Well, I kind of believe the universe sets us on a course like that and makes you meet people that you're supposed to meet along your journey. And, I don't think, in high school, I remember the moment I met Fran, and there was something about her besides being beautiful, that made us best friends immediately.
Yeah.
And, you meet those people along your life, and other people come for a few years and leave, and others come for a few minutes and leave, and others you just don't connect to. But, this sort of, I believe that kind of a cosmic force that kind of just if you get on board, it takes you where you need to go. I can't tell you how many times I've worked so hard for something to work and pushing it in different directions, and it doesn't happen. And then out of the blue, something comes right down that was perfectly perfect.
Yeah.
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 So you don't know.
That's amazing. So, you guys are doing the musical, and it sounds like you're, at the very minimum discussing, reboot possibilities. Are you rewatching the series as you're having to do all of this new development to pull from?
I wasn't. And then when it went on HBO Max, I decided one day to put it on, and I got, I brought back so many memories that I started watching the whole thing. And it did remind me of things that I thought, oh yeah, that would be good to use in the musical, something like that.
So
it's a different story, yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite episode, and why?
Well, he told we know it's it's changed.
Well, but our audience doesn't know yet. So
That's true.
I think Lamb Chop.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about that show that just makes me laugh. It's so absurd, and that they're and yet such a reflection on Hollywood. Everyone kissing this puppet's ass, literally, and acting like it's real. And she was so brilliant, Shari Lewis, and Lamb Chop, who I was a fan of when I was a kid.
Sure,
and then to have. And she was so great to go with this kind of like, Lamb with all this attitude.
Like kind of lecherous and dirty. And we were laughing so hard when we watched that episode.
Was she involved in the writing process at all on that? Or did you guys just, pitch her what you wanted and she was just game?
I don't think she was involved at all. But I think maybe on the stage, maybe there would be a couple of lines that she said she wouldn't say, the Lamb wouldn't say this. And things like that, which we would, talk to her about. But no, I think that was that was mostly us. But she was lovely to work with, and it's just that we showed that at the Museum of Television, and I hadn't seen it for a while, and it was like, wow, this is really. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah, same. We that was like the one we just rewatched, and it's it's great because we were talking about how Shari Lewis was so game for it, but like she comes off as insane, and it's hilarious that this woman is not interacting with the people around her at all, and really neither are they.
They're all just talking to the Lamb.
Yeah, no, it's really.
And how Sheffield is sort of thinking it's a little weird, but Fran's like, the Lamb's the whole act. Talk to the Lamb.
Yeah, exactly.
That ties into it.
Yeah. I was kind of curious, how much per episode, if any at all, was ever improvised? Or I would imagine not a lot, just because these sitcoms, they're filmed and everything's done on such a tight timeline, and deadlines are a big thing. But was there any of that?
No. I think it was all, I don't remember any moments. Maybe there'd be a moment that in a mistake and we'd use it because it was funny. I remember once we couldn't think of a name for somebody, for a joke. And then, it had anyway, one of the audience members yelled out a name, and it was like the perfect moment for you.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's another thing that people don't realize about sitcoms too, is that they keep saying, "Oh, it's canned laughter." It's not canned laughter. There's a couple hundred people sitting there.
Yeah. And they're hyped to be there. I mean, you don't go to a taping of a show you don't love.
Yeah, especially when the show's a hit. There can't, there's a long waiting list to get in to see it.
Yeah, well, and with some of the physical comedy in these episodes, like I can't even imagine doing it without an audience. Like, I always think of that scene where Fran accidentally kills Gracie's imaginary friend, and she's using the tops of pans as the defibrillator, and I'm like, the energy that you have to that it takes, that you got to be feeding off an audience. I don't know how some of these things could be done without that live.
It's hard. And sometimes, and now they're doing them without because of COVID, but it is hard. And it's like doing a little movie. But that was the first physical comedy scene we did. It was written by Pam Eales and Sally Lapidus. And they really brought the idea of physical comedy into the show. And Fran was so good at it that we just kept saying, let's add it in. Let's keep adding in more physical comedy because she's really good. She got really banged up. But,
oh God, yeah.
As Lucille Ball did too.
Yes.
She was very good at it, and so they rehearse it a lot, and and then when you tape it in front of the live audience, you do it once or twice, and hopefully get it. Like the scene where she shaves him.
We just saw that one. Yeah.
That was because I had seen something on television, and I thought, oh, what if we do a twist on that, which was this basically.
Yeah.
And we did it in the run through for the network, and there was not one laugh. And we thought, oh God, I thought this whole show was based around this one scene, and I thought, oh my God. And Fran pulled me aside and said, what are we going to do? I said, we got to trust that. We got to trust it. I can't imagine this not working.
Yeah.
Although it didn't. She didn't do anything wrong. It was just nobody was laughing. I'm thinking, oh God, now 200 people are coming in, and we got to get halfway through the show till we even know if that's going to work.
Yeah.
And I'm like holding my breath, and it was the biggest laugh we ever had.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We even said, Shawn, you said, how did Charles Shaughnessy keep a straight face?
Yeah.
While this was going on.
Credit to him, because he keeps such a straight face through that scene. And
I know.
It's hilarious.
He's great. He's so talented and such a lovely man. We did it. I think we only did it once. That was it.
Oh my God.
Because it was so good and the laughter was so long. I think they wanted us to cut the laugh, and we said, no, you know how hard you work for a laugh like this. Let it play. Yeah. The audience loves when they keep laughing.
It was interesting. It's interesting to hear that Sally Lapidus and Pam Eales were sort of introduced physical comedy to the show. You guys had a pretty fantastic writers' room throughout the series run. Yes. But one name always stands out to me, because I always forget that he was involved, is Bill Lawrence, who went on to do Ted Lasso and Scrubs. And I saw an interview with him recently where he was asked about the Nanny, and he basically was like, I was a child and a moron, and I did not fit there. He's like, but it was very nice of them to have me. But I wanted to know what you remember about, if anything, about his time on the show, because he did go on to, obviously have a very, very storied career at this point.
He wasn't there that long. I remember him being very talented. Obviously, that's why we hired him.
Yeah.
He was, he's an amazingly talented man. I mean, I think the Nanny had a very, very, very specific voice. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we needed a certain voice And so we'd have to take one writer out and put another writer in. But it had nothing to do with his talent.
No, that's what he basically said. The same thing was, he was like, look, it was, I got the 2 episodes I got because I think they needed what I had to bring, but I also wasn't the voice of that show. And I didn't know how to be at that point.
Right. Yeah. And he was a lovely man and very talented, and obviously has gone on to do brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
And he was great on the show. But sometimes when you're doing a show and you're doing a show a week, sometimes you need a certain voice for certain shows, which he wrote 2 great scripts.
Both Shawn and I we've written together. We've written with other partners. What would you, and there's a very delicate balance, I think, when you have a creative partner, and it's interesting, like what each person brings. And sometimes it's like the perfect recipe. You and Fran have obviously worked together for many, many years now. What is like the yin and yang of it all? Like what are you bringing and what is she bringing that like complements the other person creatively?
Yeah. Are you like the big picture story guy, or the drill down character guy, and she sort of brings in the big picture? How does the partnership break down?
She does story. She broke down all the stories with Rob Sternan for the Nanny. And gave out the notes, and then they came into the room with me and the writers. I would say the reason we work so well together is, A, we trust each other. We're not competing at all. We only want the best result.
Yeah.
She knows I have, and my eye for her is always looking out for what she'll do great and how she'll come across great. And I know how to direct her with like a look or a word that she knows what I mean, or to tell her just throw it away or whatever. And we work in shorthand.
Sure.
And we argue over things. It's not perfect. Sometimes we don't agree on something, and then we'll take a break and come back to it. I'll say, and now we're at a point in our career where we say, all right, well, I don't like the way you want to do it, and you don't like the way I want to do it. So let's find another way.
Yeah.
And we do. And it's usually a better way than both of us wanted. So, there's no one way of doing it. It's just trusting each other the most is the best. And say, if you don't like something and they don't like something, find another way. There's always another way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's probably, well, I mean, yes, when you talk about creative partnerships ending, it's usually because they've hit a wall, and it's nope, it has to be even joke writing. Like if you won't accept another version or another alt, then it's like, okay, you've just created a wall for yourself, and you're not going to go around it if you don't say, well, let's come up with a third different thing.
Yeah.
That's exactly. You never know what will play with an audience either. There are moments where you think, oh, this is the greatest joke ever. And it's like crickets. It's like,
people don't get it. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite, I guess, a favorite character to write for, where you just sort of enjoyed their joke? I mean, I think in my head, I'm a huge Niles fan. Like I just could, watch. I always say, like, sometimes we'll go, oh, it's funny that, Mr. Sheffield has his butler like in on this business meeting, but I'm so glad he does because we get more Niles.
Yeah, he was always dusting something. A little nosy, but Niles was amazing. Frank Lombardi wrote a lot of his jokes. He's a great writer. Karen Lucas, Diane Wilk, these great writers. Jane Hamill. There was like 40 of them. I'm missing a lot of them. Throughout the years. Those were some of the regulars. And I loved writing for Sylvia a lot. I just, because I wrote it as her mother. And and she, when her mother saw the show for the first time, we were so nervous that she was going to think, it's such an exaggeration. And the first thing she said was, thank God you didn't exaggerate my hair. Okay, we're good. We're good.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And as she's saying that, you're like writing the note for like, okay, I guess that's going in an episode.
Yes, exactly. Talk show material. Yeah.
Wow.
They were all very specific characters, so they all were very fun. The interesting one, the hardest one to write was Cece, because you wanted to love to hate her. you know. And she came to us in the beginning of the first season and said, "Look, guys, he's banging me in every joke, but you've got to write me back so I could zing him back, or it's just I don't, you know." And it's like the writer, and she was right, but it's another 3 hours in the writers' room to come up with funny lines that she's got to do, and it was, you know, it was her idea, and she was absolutely right, and it became one of the most, you know, beloved things about the show, their banter back and forth.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yes, because we sort of clocked that almost the exact episode where she starts retaliating. Yeah. And then we were like, I remember having this conversation with Shawn where I said, she's really hit her stride, like as a character. Like it kind of all just gelled just now as somewhere in the first season, or maybe it was in some, and it, that note, it's so interesting.
It's interesting it came from her, and you know, it's credit to what I think is really the best type of show running, which is, you know, never saying no to a good idea, you know, because even if it doesn't come from you, it's like that's a good note, you know.
Yeah, no, it was a very good note. It was a hard note to do, but it was a good note, and you know, it always usually ended up at the end, Niall saying the last line, but she always wanted something, and then he could say something. Mm-hmm. And she was right, because otherwise it's just a roll your eyes reaction. And this gave them, you know, a whole Ethel and Fred relationship.
Yes. Well, and his digs at her become more palpable when she can stand up for herself, as opposed to just being a punching bag.
Exactly.
And he becomes more likable that way too.
She had the hardest role to play because, you know, it's and the reason we were able to make such fun of her was because she was so gorgeous and so beautiful. And, you know, you could say things that were obviously just
not true.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's just, and he was, you know, I remember once directing a show and there was a line and it never worked for him. He just couldn't get it right. Nothing couldn't get it right. He just couldn't get the laugh. And the writers kept saying, well, have him do it this way, have him do it that way. I said, look, he is brilliantly talented. If he's tried it 3 ways, it's going to be in his head now. Let's just rewrite the line, because if he can't make it funny, maybe it's not that funny.
It's just not funny. Yeah.
You know, I said, so let's just rewrite it. And then, you know, sometimes you have when directing, I remember directing him, and he's so good taking direction, because there was a show where he insults Gracie because Miss Babcock's not there, and he says something to Gracie, and the audience booed it, and he calls me over, and I said, and the line was the insult, and that he said, "See, sir, it just doesn't work," with, you know, but you know, and I came over and I said, "Try it this time." And luckily he did. This was after the big boo. I said, do it this time, but run it together. So say the line and then say, don't leave a space in between it. So insult her and they say, see, sir, this just doesn't work. And there'll be a big laugh out of it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just a little adjustment. And if you have brilliant talent like we did, they're able to get it and
to pull it off.
Had a big laugh.
And we had read, I forget which kid it was now, but originally there were only 2 kids, right? In your original pitch for this?
There was no Maggie initially.
Right. And that was a network note.
That was the head of CBS, Jeff Sagansky. He said, you've got to have a teenage girl here so you can help her grow up. And it was a good note.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good note. And she became the whole story of the pilot. And
do you think that had you not been given that note, you know, do you think that a lot of those sort of growing up stories would have been thrust onto Brighton?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
And then did adding in the third kid, did it bring any issues then? Because now you're balancing another character, obviously. Because the kids go through like an interesting trajectory as the series goes on, I think, where I think Brighton seems to me like the hardest one to write for because he's not quite a teenager and he's not quite a little adorable kid.
He's a little troublemaker.
Yeah, so he just becomes a little troublemaker.
He was kind of based off of a kid of one of the writers, I think, because she'd come in with these stories that this kid would do, and he was so young, and my mouth would hang open. I'd say, "Oh my God, that is the funniest thing. We got to put that in." Or I won't say what they were because I don't know if I can, but they were hysterical, and so Brighton was, he was a little problem child, and as he was in the beginning, and that's he lost his mom, and his father paid no attention to him, and so he acted out in a lot of different ways to get attention. I think as the show developed after the first couple of seasons, it became more about the romance. That's what the people seemed to want to watch more than stories about her being a nanny. We always had something going on for the kids, but they were usually B-lines. Right. The storyline was she was the wife and he was the husband, and her family was inappropriately there, and he was just couldn't get past himself to figure this out.
Yeah, and that's what people respond to, and honestly, those are the episodes that sing the loudest.
Yes. And so it as you start doing it, what's getting the reaction, and so you start writing towards it, and the kids always had B and C lines, and once in a while an A line, but rarely, because that's just not where the show was living,
Yeah. Well, we don't want to keep you for too long, but I do have one last question before we wrap up, and that's where do you see these characters now?
So maybe he can't answer if they've been talking about this in terms of a reboot.
True. That's true.
I do have a very clear idea, and Fran and I both have a very clear idea of what we think could work as a reboot for them.
To continue the story.
Continue the story. But, 27 years have gone by, so it wouldn't be like pick up right from there. It would have to be, where they are now. She's not, she can't say she's 29 anymore.
No. Well, I mean, I called my grandmother Nanny. So I feel like at this point she could, in another couple of years, she could just be someone's nanny.
Yes. Well, she could. And we do have a very interesting idea should that happen. I'm not sure if we can do it until the musical is up. I think contractually that might be a problem, but, but we're not sure yet because that might work. I can't. I'm already
okay. We're not. We will. Okay.
Yeah, we won't make you spoil anything. I'm very excited for that. Toria and I are like, I guess we're gonna have to do a New York trip when that musical opens.
Oh my God! Yes, you better come.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited. It's marrying all of my favorite things. Into the only thing missing is Marvel superheroes, but that seems like an impossibility. So
yes, I'm sorry, we cannot give you a Marvel superhero in this particular show.
Well, I mean, this was really fantastic. Thank you for all of your time, Peter. This was really nice of you to do to take your Sunday to record with us, and I can't wait for our audience to hear this.
Yeah, where this is going to go up Wednesday at midnight. So really Thursday morning this week.
Okay, great. Send me stuff. I'll put it on my page, and thank you so much for all your support, and all the fans out there. Thank you guys. You've all been so amazing throughout these decades. Just loving our little engine that could, and it so makes you feel so wonderful that you make people laugh and give them some joy at any time. That it really warms our heart, and we are so grateful.
Well, and as always, you can find us at Oh Mr. Chef Pod on Twitter and Instagram. That's with 2 F's in chef. And Toria, you got any last words?
No, I'm just delighted. I'm so grateful, and I'm very excited.
All right.
Always ask you guys.
Yeah, that was a very special episode. So thanks again. And guys, we'll see you next week with a normal recap show. Bye.
All right, goodbye.
The Flashing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
I go, Miss Fine.